Welcome to Dark Iron, a Darker Days radio podcast in the world of Iron Kingdoms. I'm one of your regular hosts, Chris, and I'm joined by Crystal. Hi, Crystal.
Hello.
Hello. We're back again. If you already listened to Darker Days Radio, you know we have episodes that mainly focus on horror and horror and RPGs of various flavors. And you know also that we have lots of hobby RPG advice. And you also know that we talk about a lot about wargaming as well. So that also kind of crosses over with this series. So this series is a completely brand new series that's going to be ongoing about the Iron Kingdoms RPG. Iron Kingdoms, if you're not aware of it, is currently a D&D 5e setting, and it has previously used its own setting when it was Full Metal Fantasy that was based upon the war game, and then before that, in its first incarnation, it was a D20 system game. So it has its origins all the way back in D&D anyway. If you play the war games, you're aware of that the main name that you should know of is War Machine, and of course Hordes, which are now both actually in 4th edition just called War Machine. And the fact is, as I've said, that there are 4 editions of that war game, and the 4th edition is the most recent one, and has some pretty kick-ass models because I've painted them and I am eyeing up the new armies. So before we get into this, I'll do a quick kind of update of like gaming news because there's quite a few things actually that's going on related to Iron Kingdoms. So currently, if you want to get into the war games, you can buy the Kador and Signar starter armies. I think also the Warcasters and Warjacks are individually available. And when I say Warcasters, they're 2 different characters to the ones that are actually in the armies themselves. Then soon to be released is Dusk, which is another War Machine Warcaster-led army, and that is the faction which is the Iozan Elves, but they've since become very undead-like in the new, where the setting is up to. So there's lots of cool designs there. And you can also get the Orgoth army. We'll talk about Orgoth at some point in this podcast series in more depth. And also there is the new Trollkin army, and I think they're called like Brine Lord Marauders or something like that. But basically, they're Trollkin, they're pirates, and they've got cool things like the Warlock, and we'll explain what a Warlock is in this setting. Is this cool Trollkin captain, but he's got on his shoulder a starfish that's holding a pistol as well, and you're just like, that's completely nuts. So that's why I like this setting. It doesn't really give a damn. Anyway, other than that, that's the wargaming stuff. On the RPG side, Nightmare Empire is going out to backers right now. The Deep Wild is the next Kickstarter, which will be coming soon, which looks at more of the factions that live out in the wilderness, like Gatorfolk. And yeah, that's basically it on the gaming news from kind of the Iron Kingdoms. Obviously, because it's D&D and it's 5e, you might find some utility from Black Ballad, which we recently did an interview about, and that's been through Backakit and has been funded. So you might find some interesting character concepts and systems that you port, or even scenarios that you port back into the Iron Kingdoms. But before we go on any more about gaming news, I guess the next thing is we're going to talk about what is the Iron Kingdom, since this is the first episode and a full introduction about this setting. Okay, so the Iron Kingdoms is like a huge setting that is fully featured and like expanded upon over the last, oh God, I want to say 20 years. It is 20 years. Oh no, it is 20 years. Um, that's just crazy because it was like definitely 2003 when I started playing the war game, and that's mostly at the same time when Witchfire Trilogy came out. Um, so where do we begin, Crystal? Where do we start? What do we need to explain?
I feel like explaining like the feel of the setting
Yeah,
before we get into it, because like it took me quite some time. Like I played this a couple of times, at least once. Um and it is a very very different feel from like the traditional 5e settings that you would be playing with normally with the base like game
yeah.
for Dungeons and Dragons. I almost want to describe it as like primal punk.
Uh,
Like
what's primal punk?
primal punk is more um like feral animalistic.
Yeah. I mean, that's an aspect of it. That's definitely an
Yeah.
aspect of it, but is definitely part of the wider world of Iron Kingdoms.
Yeah.
So, so the things which we'll delve into a little bit more is that in Iron Kingdoms, I would say if you were to go to say to someone, go, what makes War Machine War Machine? What makes the war game of War Machine what it is? It is steam jacks, which are these big automata. So they're basically robots, but steam powered. But there's also an element of magic in how they operate, and they are controlled by warcasters who are able to channel magical energy through them through into these warjacks to get them to do more stuff in battle. And then similarly, going back to your primal punk point,
Yeah.
out in the wilderness and certain wilderness peoples, there are the equivalent, which is warlocks, which are very different to what you know in D&D of warlocks, and they bind themselves to and control war beasts. So they're kind of the primal version of warjacks. Um, and of course, the general way of explaining, at least in war games terms, what they're like is a warcaster is like a steam engine, and they have only a certain amount of power to distribute to their systems. Their systems being the warjacks, while a warlock is having to manage multiple nuclear reactors, which are the war beasts, and trying to not let them go critical too soon. Because when they do, they go full frenzy and go out of control and murderize, and then they can bring them back under their control. So that's kind of where at least we get a feel for what the warcasters are, and we'll get into that a bit more. But
Yeah.
ultimately, yes, the wilderness setting has this very primal uh, feel where you've got factions doing a form of alchemy using what they gain from beasts and animals in the land. Whereas the kingdoms, I would say, compared to what people typically think of in D&D, are much more technologically advanced.
Yes.
So when I think of Iron Kingdoms, when I describe it to anyone, I always say, think of Sharp, but with some Tolkien-esque magic in there, or Tolkien-esque tropes in there, and then make it a little bit gonzo with the amount of destruction and power that can happen. So a person like Captain, like our favorite character, like Sharp, leading his chosen men, is in a Napoleonic warfare kind of scenario, is totally valid in Iron Kingdoms, because you do get trench warfare and you do get them warfare between different kingdoms, and they're going to have at some point an encounter with someone that's mostly just as debonair and dashing as Sharp, but is wielding magic and controlling warjacks. And these warjacks have, again, weapons that channel magic into them. So might be doing lightning bolts crackling from some lance, while also carrying. I mean, the warjack might be carrying like a giant Gatling gun. That's all very different to when we think D&D.
Yeah.
Um, So there's definitely there's that element of magic. There are multiple different gods in the setting. We'll get into that a bit more, and there are multiple different kind of heritages, species that you can play as. So there's humans, there are elves of a sort, there are dwarves of a sort, there are trollkin, there are ogren, which basically kind of ogres, uh, and then you've got everything else that gets a bit more weirder, like gator folk, pharaoh, which are like pig people. Um, you've got the weirdness of the cephalics, who is well beyond the scope of this first episode to get into their weirdness. And then, of course, you've got Crix, which is an island nation of of humans, but also there are humans that live in the Shard Isles there, but also is a totally undead kingdom. So I would say, like, if you can think of like elements of the Renaissance going into Victoriana kind of setting, that to me is Iron Kingdoms. If you chuck in like goblins and other weird creatures and magical, magical steam powered automata. There's also steam trains. There are airships. There are sailing ships of sorts. So it's quite common for most characters in the setting are going to carry, more than likely are going to carry like pistols. But again, because of the technology and how magic interacts with it, uh, you do also get kind of like knights in armor, but that's mostly because their armor has been alchemically strengthened against firearms. So it's that kind of thing of where some of the things that we think of as being typically kind of fantasy kind of tropes can still exist because the technology and magic combine in ways to allow those things to persist.
Yeah, because firearms are a bigger thing in this setting,
Oh yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Okay.
There is a huge number of firearms you can get. Um, there are firearms that are magical, so that means they've been made from magically resonating alloys,
Okay.
and that's really cool because that also means warcasters, as I said, combined to warjacks. You can also get this kind of alloyed plates called rune plates that you put onto weapons and armor and even firearms that allow warcasters to also channel their magic and energy through those contraptions.
Yeah.
But then you've also got gun mages, which are like my favorite character type, and that is like, if we're going to say character type, that is my favorite class. So that's one of the new classes in the game, and they are think dashing, tricorn hat wearing, um, you gun masters basically, and they can channel spells through their firearm. So will they etch runes into their shot, and those shots then, when they fire them, have additional effects due to the magical spells that they pull off through that.
Yeah, it looks like almost like their bullets are their spells,
Yes.
which is pretty awesome. I like that.
So yeah, I mean, if you pick up the Iron Kingdom's Requiem campaign setting, you basically get, and that's like the core book of Iron Kingdoms, you get a lot of information that tells you a good amount about the setting as it stands, and a lot has happened since the previous edition of Iron Kingdoms and the third edition of the war game. So the setting also has progressed. In fact, many characters in the war games are dead. They are so dead. They're like gone. Like the world has changed. So if you play as a human, let's just say if you play as a human in Iron Kingdoms, you are likely to be from one of four kingdoms. So there is Kador, which is kind of like a Tsarist. I I refrain from thinking Russia, but I would say Tsarist elements of Slavic countries,
Yeah.
because if we look at Ukraine, Ukraine is actually technically an older kingdom by comparison. So I would say Slavic kingdoms, you get that element of uh, they're also kind of very controlling. um, and a bit warmongering. And they also don't tend to make things small. They don't have such a thing as a light warjack in the war game. They just go big. Um, they have their own kind of school for their magically gifted people called the
Okay.
Grey Lords Covenant. And those Grey Lords, again, they'll specialize in different ways, but that's their school of magic, as it were.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, Kador is one of those kingdoms. It is more to the north of Western Amoran. So Amoran is this huge continent that the world has. The whole world is called Cairn. That's the name of the planet. Uh, and then south of that, there is a kingdom called Ord, which is a bit more into has a good kind of like healthy sea trading kind of history to it. Um, it's a bit more of a let's just say I would say it has more of a pirate tradition to that kingdom. It has kind of a more I would guess has a slightly some Spanish Portuguese kind of themes in there to kind of give it its character. Uh, and one of the cities near it, which is on the mouth of this huge river called the Dragon's Tongue River, is called Five Fingers. And that's literally just a pirate city. It's Tortuga on drugs. And that's good fun. It used to be like this, and it's built on the ruins of the Orgoth who invaded Western Amoran. We'll get to that. Another kingdom is called Lael, and that's between Kador and Signar and east of Ord. And Lael is more kind of French Italian in my mindset of what it is. They got invaded. They're a small kingdom. They got invaded. They had a whole lot of problem about who should inherit the throne. They're also the nominal home of the Order of the Golden Crucible, which is like the main alchemist guild in the setting. So they got invaded though by Kador. They got invaded by the Protector of Menoth, and now they're free again. So in the war game, they had a lot of armies that were built up from mercenary factions. They've got kind of more of a. They don't have a big standing army, but they have. They're coming back into their own in the setting as it is now, with a lot of wealth, because there's again who's going to marry who in the setting, all of that. It's good fun with that stuff. And then the next main kingdom is Signar, which is I guess is our stand-in for pretty much every other Western European nation going, with an element I would say of the US as well, because and when I say the US, because Iron Kingdoms is a bit of a kind of genre mashup, because there are areas of the Iron Kingdoms where you would go, actually, that's more like a Western. So you can quite support having like, a frontier town somewhere on the border to the Badlands where it's all rooting tooting kind of bison, bison ranches and, firearms and someone's got to be the sheriff and so forth. But the rest of Signar is more in that kind of point in it's definitely heading towards being more Victorian, because they've got technologies like that enables them to create electricity. So basically channeling magic into their engines that then creates electricity and light and so forth, as well as making devastating weapons. So those are the kind of like the kingdoms that there are. There are some other ones. So there's one called Rule, which is dwarves, and that's north of Lael and east of Kador. And that's interesting as a setting because due to what happened with the Infernal invasion, they've basically started taking in lots of refugees from different parts of the world. So they're quite a mercantile race as well. Eos is this whole race of elves that were in the woods, and the thing about them is their gods got killed. Most of their gods get killed, and then they decided, let's kill the two remaining gods. And the end result is they have most of the race now are soulless or are something called I can't remember the term, but basically they're undead. They're like vampires, but elves. And they've got their own technology. So they in the setting, elves were came into the world after humans, which is kind of different. And their warjacks and technology are more passive, if that makes sense. Like they they know how to work with the energies of the world and draw it in gently and work with the ley lines and so forth, whereas everyone else is doing it like, in the nasty industrial revolution way of just manipulating magic. And then Crix is this whole island nation off the coast of Signar, which is where a huge giant dragon, one of many, called Torok, is able to he's able to breathe life into people and make them undead. And so there's a whole undead nation there, literally a nation of undead ghosts, zombies, every kind of thing you going for them, plus humans who are being tainted by like almost by like this radioactive essence that comes off Torok. And the fun about the Crix is they also have warjacks, but the difference about them is their warjacks are using machinery and bones and flesh. So they do what's known as necrotech, and they fuel their warjacks not with coal, but with something called why can't I think of it right now? It's not coal. It's why can't I think of it? It's gone from my head. Anyway, the point is they can fuel it with that material because what it is it's they mine it from the earth beneath battlefields and burial grounds because it's condensed death energy and it makes its own form of coal that you need less of to burn. It burns hotter, but also it's really toxic as you burn it, which of course doesn't matter if you're undead, so it's good for them. So that's kind of like the what you would call overall the Iron Kingdoms because they all use kind of steam jack technology of a sort.
Okay, so you're talking about like warjacks and stuff like that. When it comes specifically to warjacks, are they like the main thing that these kingdoms use for fighting and stuff like that?
Oh yeah,
like what do they play? What part do they play within this?
Oh yeah, they're literally so if you've got a whole army that consists of like trench, that's basically trench warfare with your knight. You may have some knights. You've got people that are obviously using rifles. Your kind of elite warriors, your warcasters, your commanders are going to command a handful of warjacks into battle. You don't have to be a warcaster to control a warjack. So you can be someone that can control a warjack using verbal commands. And that's obviously something you can do in the game. You can play a character you can get hold of a warjack, you know how to control it that way. But a warcaster almost like mentally controls their warjacks. So on the battlefield, they are a small army of one. I say army of one. They're a person who's extended their abilities through the warjacks that they have bound to them.
Okay.
And so all of these kingdoms I've spoke about are able to do that. And the other interesting thing to say about all these kingdoms, they're not just a singular people. So in the Iron Kingdom setting, you could go, well, I'm from Signar, but actually I'm actually my heritage is Umbrian. So there's all these ancient kingdoms in the setting that people understand the heritages from, but those kingdoms don't exist in the modern setting.
Gotcha.
So that's something I find really important about the setting is that you can go, right, I'm Cadoran, but I'm a Cadoran from this part of Cador. So therefore the likelihood is I'm actually born from that heritage. Or
Okay.
you may be a Cadoran who actually has a mother who's from the kingdom of Lael or something like that. So there's all these things that I think adds some richness to it and is more akin to what it's like living in our world.
Yeah, it's not so much a mono, like one race
Yeah.
per place. It is a amalgamation of all of them.
And of course, in all these kingdoms, there's a mix of everyone. So if you go to Signar, there is a certain number of Trollkin and Rulic dwarves and Iozan elves and other races, other heritages that also would go, well, yeah, okay, I'm a Trollkin, but I live in Signar and I like living in Signar. I feel like that is, if anyone would say, where are you from? You would go, I'm from Signar, not from I'm from Kingdom X because I am Heritage X, which I think again is maybe something that's quite distinct from typical D&D stuff where I would go either you've got lots of human civilizations, and then you've got some civilization that is obviously, well, that's the elves and that's the dwarves and that's the tieflings or whatever the heck, I don't know. um, so yeah, there's lots of things you can play. So like if we look at the cultures of Signar, I'll just give a quick rundown to give you an
Yeah.
idea. There are Caspians, there are Midlanders, there are Moridanes, there are Thurians, and then there are also in there's different languages as well. So the main language would be called Signarum, but there's also a language called Sulese, which is to do with the Protectorate of Menoth, which doesn't exist anymore. Um, there's if you go to Cador, you've got Cards, Cossites, Skirov, Umbrians. In Lael, you've got the Rin and Umbrians and Torridons. Um, yeah, there's it's you could actually, if you wanted to run it, you could get quite deep into that culture and
Yeah.
figuring out, and that's I think that makes it interesting for like character building in the setting, because for people to play it, they can go, well, you're all from Signar, but you're not all from the same parts of Signar, or even if you are from the same parts of Signar, even then, what your heritage and how you've grown up is could be quite different depending upon the heritage of your parents and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like it's a lot more, it feels more like a lived in.
Yeah.
Like you're kind of jumping into the middle of somebody's world building with their characters and everything like that.
Um, and so as I said, there's some other kingdoms as well, other factions, so they're beyond them. So there's patches of wilderness in these huge kingdoms. So there's huge forests and mountain ranges and even some deserts and so forth. So that's generally where you find some of the other heritages that are a bit more, as you say, that kind of primal punk feel. So there are
Yeah.
the Trollkin also have their communities in what are known as creoles. So they're very much more, they have these palisade kind of like settlements, and inside they've got I wouldn't say mud huts, but they're not huge kind of Victorian cities we're talking about. They are a creole is essentially a few a few hundred trollkin and their troll beasts that live together. But they will
Yeah.
obviously, these trollkin creoles will form together when there's the need for war. Likewise, if you go into the swamps, there are gator people. So that's basically, big gator, alligator type people that have their own magic. There are croaks, which are frog like people. Pharaoh, as I've said, are pig like people. They're quite interesting because they've just formed they just got the start of their own kingdom going on. So before they didn't have one, and now the biggest pharaoh of them all has got aspirations of godhood and is setting up a kingdom, a little city state out in the wilderness. Um, and then you've got the Orgoth who are invading the Iron Kingdoms once again. So the Iron Kingdoms are called the Iron Kingdoms because there was like the Orgoth over 600 years ago invaded Western Amoran, and they have demonic infernal overlords, and they took over for a good over 600 years ago they did that, and they took over, and then 600 years ago around about 700 years ago, there was the revolution, or the start of it, and that's what freed all of the human kingdoms of Western Moran from the Orgoth. And the main part of that was they, because before then they didn't have magic. Humans haven't been able to wield magic, and then suddenly they learned how to do it. They overnight got the gift of magic thanks to
Oh.
one of their gods, and combining magic with what the Rulic dwarves knew about metallurgy is what allowed them to create the first warjacks, which the first warjacks were completely massive, like really huge, over the top, over engineered, but they obliterated the Orgoth. And the Orgoth, who are kind of like Viking infernal kind of mix of things, disappeared, but then now they're back with infernal powered, their own version of warjacks, but infernal powered. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where we are up to in the world. So also in the setting, there is a good amount of infernalism, and because there's another infernal faction who invaded Western Moran, who if the Orgoth were use warjacks, this other faction use their own version of war beasts, but they're big demonic
Okay.
beasties. And then to really put a spanner in the works, there's also Grimkin, which are kind of like fey creatures. And that takes a huge amount to explain at some point. Which actually, by mentioning magic, again, that brings us on to the next thing, which is magic and faith is quite different in this setting.
Okay.
So magic is, again, humans got the gift of magic, and spoiler alert, it's not really a spoiler at this point. It's because one of the human gods, Thamar, which was a human who got elevated to godhood, who is kind of like the god. She represents like going against order and how can I explain? It's like she's basically left-handed path, if that makes sense. She's it's not Satanism, but it's more like taking empowerment for yourself rather than always being giving to other people.
Got it. Okay.
That's why certain people flock to her worship that then tend to do horrible things like sacrificing people or necromancy. But anyway, she, seeing what was going to happen, she made a deal with the Infernals, and she basically went, "Can we, if we have the gift of magic, can we have it?" And they're like, "Yeah." And the price was the Elven gods, which is horrible, and also 2/3 of all souls on the world of Cairn. And that's what recently happened, was the Infernal invasion to take those souls. Of course, it didn't go as to plan for the Infernals. Because of the Grimkin. That's a whole big thing we'll get into, because the Grimkin were out there devouring all the evil people in the world, which happen to be the agents of the Infernals. So it's all a clusterfuck of everything. But anyway, so Thamar is one of the gods, is a human god. The other god, her twin, is Morrow, who is, the way I explain this is that there's also another human god called Menoth, who's even older. So Menoth, I kind of consider as like Old Testament God, whereas Morrow is New Testament God, and Thamar is left-handed path, kind of. But she's not technically evil. She's about self-empowerment, rather than Morrow is about helping your fellow man or fellow kin. Whereas Menoth is very much, old school fire, brimstone, you're all humans, you worship me. And Menoth is locked in a battle with the Devourer Worm, which is this god of the wilderness. There's also a female god of the wilderness called Duania, and then there's the Iozan gods, who are all dead. But there were two, and they're all dead now. They're dead. And then there's infernal entities, and there's a few other gods out there. Interestingly enough, Toruk, who that kind of giant dragon, is almost god level, but not a god. And there are other dragons who were created when Toruk cut shards from his soul stone called an Arthanc, and those became dragons themselves. His problem with that is they rebelled against him, and he's been slowly devouring his children. So that's the gods. So with the gods, you do have the ability to channel divine power from them. So you have clerics in this setting, but you can be a cleric of one of these gods. But with the coming of magic, that opened up the other way of doing, what I would say other mystical things. And so Thamar is kind of that goddess of magic for humans. There are many different types of magic. There's necromancy. There is infernalism. And the interesting things about magic in this setting is magic is not subtle.
Okay.
So, and certain things in the setting you can't do. So you can't resurrect someone from the dead. Like you can't, there's no planar travel. There's none of that stuff. So certain spells in Iron Kingdoms are completely, from D&D, are completely banned. So it really changes the tone of it, because you won't be doing, the idea is you shouldn't be doing subtle magic in Iron Kingdoms. Magic is this overwhelming power that will blow, buildings apart. Not, you go zap and I'll light a candle. If you want to have something that creates light, you use some sort of mechanica. So you use some little device that channels magic into it using an arcane capacitor, and that creates something that then causes some illumination. So that is what machinery means in the Iron Kingdoms. It's the means to channel, at least arcane machinery, is the means to channel magic to do something in a routine fashion.
Okay.
And therefore, that's why the Iron Kingdoms is on the cusp of, or is going through the process of, an industrial revolution. So there's trains and there's all these things thanks to the use of magic through mechanica.
So it's magic powered steampunk.
Yeah.
Okay. So with like if there's no connection, or if the connection with the magic and the gods are a little bit different, where does the magic that doesn't come from the gods come from? Is that ever answered in there, or is it just kind of
so the other I think the other peoples, the other, like if they're dwarves or Iosans, they were created innately to be able to channel magic without having to do divine acts of faith, whereas humans, for whatever reason, were made without that ability.
Okay. All right. Also, like, with all of these gods dying, why would you want to try to become a god?
Yeah, well, that's a huge thing, because if we go back to the Grim King, in the setting, they are because in the ancient times, certain high priests of Menoth rebelled against Menoth because they realized that Menoth wasn't actually special, that this divinity exists in all humans. Yeah. So they got locked away in the afterlife called Urken, and that's where the gods exist as well. And they were locked away for 1,000 years, and then they got kind of changed by that, and they're kind of, as I say, they're kind of Fae-like, and they figured out ways to get their minions into the world, so Grimkin, these Fae creatures, into the world, and that happens when there's a slight doorway when people die, especially if they're evil, and they like taking evil souls and reshaping them into Grimkin.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Yeah,
and they were unleashed on the, and let's say they were unleashed on the world to devour the souls of all the infernalists to stop the infernal invasion. Completely mad.
Oh, okay. So you said that there is like there is no like resurrection and stuff like that. Is
no.
There? And it's kind of confined, but are there other spaces and stuff like that within this world? Because I know like one of these locations I was reading up on is like a bridge. Where is that not
What the
Lael?
a bridge? The okay. Oh right, you're talking about there was a bridge. There was a bridge, right? So the elven gods were like, oh yeah, they were trying to escape the infernals. So they existed in a realm between Urken and the outer darkness called the Veld, which is basically this kind of forest, kind of other
Okay.
realm type thing. To escape, they got the elves to build the other side of this bridge between realms, but it basically they came over. They existed in Urken with the elves, gods in the material world. That's a pretty huge thing. But then in doing so, they realized they were beginning to lose their essence, and so had to go back to the Veld. In doing so, there was a cataclysm that destroyed that bridge, and is why there's a huge like scar, like chasm down the middle of the continent,
Oh. Okay.
and that's why
Oh my goodness.
two of the gods didn't make it back over, and stayed, and why they were trapped in this world in Cairn and then eventually died. And the other ones that went over were the ones that got sold off to give humans magic.
Okay.
So yeah, you can't do you know in terms of magic. There are let me find it. You you're not going to be able to ever easily go anywhere else. You are basically stuck in Ken, in the material world. You're never going to go to Urken because you're just not going to.
Okay.
It's not that kind of setting. Um, so interesting. The other factor about magic is also that when people cast magic, you can see the runes of the magic. So magic is quite visible. So when someone casts magic, a circle around them appears of runes, like almost floating. So you can
Okay.
actually perceive what the spell is that they're performing by reading those runes.
Okay. All right. So with all of this connection with magic and stuff like that, and all of this big stuff going on, what is it that players can do or expect in like a regular game?
So that's where you can actually do quite a bit. So if we go through, let's start with what the new there's some new classes in the game. Obviously, there's going to be some
Yeah.
new classes. So in Requiem, you can play. We've already said about Gun Mage, and there's a few schools of Gun Mage. So you can learn how to be a Gun Mage in different ways. There's Warcasters who control Warjacks. There's Arcane Mechanics, so basically how to do magical machinery. There's Alchemists who do alchemy. And then
Yeah.
there's Gunfighter, because guns are so prevalent. Why not have gunfighters? The new heritages are Trollkin and Ogren. And then the interesting thing, and then we'll get into what you can do. You know how normally in D&D, when you pick your heritage, you get some stat bonuses?
Currently, yes. Yep.
Yes. Currently, yes. Requiem got rid of that on the outset. And this actually comes from Full Metal Fantasy, the previous version.
Yeah.
So when you make your character, you also choose an essence, and these give you certain feats and also certain ability bonuses and aptitudes. So you could choose to be intellectual, which is going to make your intelligence and wisdom and charisma higher. You can be mighty, which is going to increase your strength, dexterity, or constitution. Oh yeah, these are all or. So intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. Strength, dexterity, or constitution, or mighty. Agile, dexterity, wisdom, or charisma. Gifted, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, and of course that then means you know how to do magic, because you have it in you to do magic. You've been born to it.
Okay.
And then so that's actually something interesting, is you are born with the gift of magic. You can't learn it.
Okay.
And then pious is constitution, wisdom, and charisma. So pious is about your connection with the divine, essentially. So those are the five essences, and then you pick your heritage, which is going to be Gobber, which is basically goblins, human, dwarf, Io's an elf. There's another type of elves, which is the Nis. I'll get into that another day. Ogren, Trollkin, or the ones that come from Borderlands and beyond, which is all the, Pharaoh and Bogrin and so forth. But what you can play, I mean, it really depends what kind of part of the world you want to explore. So you could play quite happily. You could be a group within the military of a particular kingdom and be kind of I guess, a special ops type of group who are sent on missions. You could be investigators who live in one of the cities investigating all the various crimes. And of course, crime's going to be weird where there's magic and alchemy. So I like running it that way. I like running investigative horror in Iron Kingdoms, and it then becomes very kind of Sherlock Holmes, but with magic, which is kind of fun. You could quite easily play merchants. You could play, and this is the great thing, is actually in the book you've got adventuring companies. So what these are essentially are frameworks that tell you if you play a characters within certain restrictions, you will get certain benefits as well.
Okay.
So you play to a theme. So you could play an arcane order. So you could all be members of a order of mystics or a guild. And there are different tiers to this. So as you go up in experience and you put more money into your adventuring company, you'll get more benefits and so forth. You could be a cult. You could all be members who worship Thamar and be a cult, which would be cool to a certain extent. I think would be kind of fun. But you could also be worshipping the Defiers, those weird entities behind the Grimkin. You could also quite happily be, as I said, intrepid investigators. You could be law dogs. That's another one in here. So you're basically members of the City Watch. You're or you could be bounty hunters, or something like that. What other ones we've got here? Mercenary charter, outlaws. You could be a criminal gang. You could be pirates. And there's in Nightmare Empire, in that Kickstarter, one of the books adds a huge amount of rules to sea ships and piracy, and there's island generators and sea monsters galore. You could be a spy ring. That's a fun idea. That'd be really fun. So that gets us more into that kind of Blades in the Dark kind of play, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, so every Kickstart, every other book that's come out that's brought in new character options, those books add in new adventuring companies. So if I was to take, for example, my go-to, which is the Intrepid Investigators, for instance, that says prerequisites. You have to play one character who is either you have to include at least one character who is an explorer, an investigator, or seeker background. So background's another thing entirely again. So you've got your character class, your heritage, your essence, your background, which is kind of a way of adding a few extra details to the character type to make them more specific. And that's quite useful because some players might come into this going like, I really like a certain kind of unit type within the war game, like let's say the Manor Wars in the Cadoran army, which are basically soldiers in battle suits.
Okay.
I want to play one of those. You'd be like, okay, you need to get this, that background. There, you're a Man of War. Done. So it's quite permissive to let you play everything in the war game, basically. But if you play Intrepid Investigators, as long as someone is playing the Sherlock Holmes, or Intrepid Investigators could also mean your tomb robbers or ghost hunters. So you could go with various things, or belong to a university in the setting. And go look, because it needs to be in a museum, of course. So the benefits you get is like exhaustive research. So you get a benefit to doing research on various things, and then your accomplishments are basically like if you find an ancient relic or an ancient ruin, or you observe a dangerous beast up close, or you publish an amazing book on monsters because you've you know been out in the wilds looking at beasties and you've written an amazing book. That's how you go up the tiers. And so the
Okay.
first benefit you get in for your fledgling adventurers would be, say, linguistics. Everyone's better at language. You're better at observing things, and then also you get some you get opportunities. You basically have better contacts to find out where there's opportunities to do stuff. And as these groups get bigger, you also get underlings because you
Okay.
start hiring people, and you
Yeah.
get again other bonuses. So it's and each one of the adventuring companies is like that. So I think the great thing about Iron Kingdoms is that, and the thing that's intimidating is, yeah, the setting is freaking huge, right? At this stage,
Yeah.
we have done a very top slice of the setting, and in that respect, we've done a top slice in the first half, which is insane. Um, but if you utilize the adventuring companies and you go, right, if you start from that and go, what do we want to play as? And you go, right, let's all play as members of a cult because that's something interesting. Then that helps everyone think about how to build their character to fit that goal rather than say everyone turn up to the table and go, I want to play you know, a cleric, a um, gun mage, a warcaster, and a trollkin. And yet
Yeah.
there's nothing easily unifies them because no one knows the setting well enough or has a good idea. And also, likewise, a games master could go, right, I know kind of what stories I want to run, but also I've written things in such a way that it's permissive enough for quite a few different adventuring companies to work. So, like, you can easily see the same sort of stories working for intrepid investigators as it would work for a cult or for an arcane order or for law dogs. The difference is what they're getting out of it. Because a cult could go, let's investigate this strange murders involving infernalism. Yeah, we could turn up and go, we're going to help solve the murders. But the reason they want to solve the murders is because they want the magical knowledge rather than the intrepid investigators who are clearly doing it because they want to document things, and then the law dogs who are doing it because it's their job to stop the murders. So that's, I think, quite a useful approach to the game for the
Yeah.
GM and for the players.
Yeah, it kind of helps you to narrow down your focus because with such a large world, when you're like, you have all of this possibility for any type of story, you're like, I have no clue what to pick. And
Yeah.
then you have a group that picks things that are so far apart that it's almost impossible to kind of jam it together in a cohesive way to make it enjoyable for everybody.
Yeah, and I'm obviously I always come from the side of like I prefer putting in restrictions quite early in a game
Yeah.
to to help people to and people go, oh, but I can't get to play no, it's to help you play cohesively as a group so everyone is having fun rather than someone picking all the options that actually may make it really not fun for both the players and the GM. And I think that's just something you have to accept. I think not every character is going to work in it. So I mean, having done that top slice, and we've gone on for an hour,
Yeah.
and I've spoken a lot. What for you, Crystal, jumps out and makes you go, right? I want to play this type of thing, or I want to explore this in more detail.
I think that like the magic aspect is really what's drawing me. And I like the fact that there is both a gun mage but also a gunslinger
Yeah,
because you have people who don't have access to magic, so of course they're going to learn how to use a gun. Like that's just a part of survival. So I like that aspect. I like the alchemist stuff. I've always been drawn to alchemy. And so like if like being able to explore like some of the alchemist stuff or like how magic would affect that type of thing especially with magic being so different from everything else. Like alchemy, I could almost see it being something completely different from actual magic.
Oh yeah, alchemy is again that kind of, because magic condenses into things in different ways, like that innate essence that condenses
Yeah,
into certain minerals or certain gizzards in a creature or whatever. Then alchemy again fits into that, creating magical effects through routine procedures and recipes. And
absolutely. Yeah.
so, you know, while an arcanist can channel magic and may be able to blow something up, that requires effort, and they can only do that so many times before they are exhausted. So that's something that's also in this game. Is there's also an alternate spell casting system called, that's about fatigue. So it's not about how many
Okay.
slots you've got to cast a spell. It's how exhausted you are, and then going, shall I go a step further and see if I pass out and cast this spell, which I think is more fun. Um, but for the alchemist, you don't have that problem. You've got okay, you've run out of fireballs, but I can keep chucking these grenades that I've made beforehand. The problem
Yeah.
is the alchemist is going to run out, but they can prepare a lot more. So, but again, their options are limited, because how many solutions, how many grenades, how many formulas and serums can they pre-prepare before a fight?
Yep.
Sure, not many, but then outside of a fight, when they're doing investigations and so forth, and they've got access a bit more time to sit down with their their bag of their mobile bag of alchemical ingredients, they can pull off some much more interesting effects because they've got time to sit down and grind things up and mix them up.
I'm looking at the alchemist subclasses, and there's like combat alchemist, which is pretty awesome. And then you have the synthesis, which is someone who can like fast brew stuff, and then you have a rogue alchemist. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is amazing.
Oh yeah, so they're literally just an alchemist that isn't following the rules and regulations of the guilds, and
No,
are just doing it for their own
like at
benefit.
18th level life on the run. Like that is your top thing for that subclass. I am down for this.
I mean, it's been an experience for me personally writing for D&D, because for 5e, because I know the setting better than I know D&D inside out, and I've learnt a lot in doing this. Um, but again, I mean, people have different opinions on like how you build things, and I think, because when you look at some of these things, I'm sure to an experienced person, I'll look at like, again, like alchemist and combat alchemist, and they go, oh, and if I cross class that with this from all these D&D books, yeah, of course you're going to come up with something that's game breaking. You've just chosen 3 or 4 different books that were never envisioned to work together.
Oh yeah.
So I still think you should, by all means, cross class in 5e in Iron Kingdoms, but I think if you cross class within its ball pit, then you won't get things being too crazy. But then it's a role play game. Like, at the same time, play what's fun, but also don't play things just for the sake of breaking your GM's game just because you think that's the point. Yeah, there's ton. So that's the other thing. Every class has a subclass. So gun mage has a few subclasses. What does gunfighter have, actually? I forgot what gunfighter has.
Uh
Oh,
Pistolier,
gunfighter's got pistolier. That's fun.
sharpshooter,
And
and
commando.
commando. I was
Yeah,
just looking at it as soon as you asked.
yeah, and again, you could see how those could cross over with if you were to play.
Like a fighter.
Yeah, a fighter who's mounted, because then you've got like a gunfighter who's a crack
Yep.
shot with a sharpshooter who's mounted on a horse. If you combine those things together, you've pretty much got a character who's a good highwayman, or
Yeah.
like or a really good sheriff who's riding in the saddle and like pot shotting like some raiders.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. It's a pure. The setting is really a genre mashup. It's a good dose of Sherlock Holmes, a good dose of Sharp, a good dose of any of like Tombstone and all the good westerns out there. And then you inject some bits from 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 other mythologies, because the Grimkin have that very good kind of Slavic mythology feel to them as well. I
Yeah.
feel, and then with Golden Age of Piracy, that slots in quite happily. If you go out into the deserts, I do know there's going to be some vehicles powered by Menoph's Fury, which is basically oil. So there's going to be an element of like some sort of vehicles turning up. And then with the Cricks and Ghosts and the Strange Light workshop, who are basically ghost hunters. You've got your Ghostbusters in there, and you've got Undead, and Pirates of the Caribbean fits in with this quite well, I guess. Pirates of the Caribbean, yeah. God, that's that's done and done. You could do that out. You just need the Requiem and Nightmare Empire and which book is it? Scoundrels and something. I can't remember off the top of my head. That has all the pirate stuff in there. But basically, you're full on pirates, and you're ready for it.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of stuff that's just baked in where you can expand upon it, and you can even like do your own homebrew style too. But I do say, like, one of the fantastic things that this book does, the at least the player handbook, it has story hooks built into all of the areas.
Yeah.
And that's baked into the setting. You don't have to go searching for it. If you're like, I want to, have a game that starts off in this area, there's like 7 or 8 plot hooks throughout that whole section in the book that you can use to get your characters started.
Yeah. So I was going to just finish up, just to give the things that are, because in the GM section, the things that are make it different to standard D&D. So spells not known in the Iron Kingdom is going to quickly go through, because people might be like, okay, astral projection, contact of a plane, etherealness, fabricate, floating disc, magnificent mansion, maze, plane shift, resurrection, rope trick, secret chest, speak with plants, unseen servant, and wish are spells that don't exist in the setting. Also, as said with healing and resurrection, it's painful. So even if someone uses some sort of magic to heal you, it will leave scars, and they will be very different to regular scars. And the following spells cannot be prepared normally in the Iron Kingdoms: Raise Dead, Reincarnate, Resurrection, Revivify, and True Resurrection, because that basically gets you into necromancy. So interestingly, you'll find certain spells which are considered evil in D&D are not evil in Iron Kingdoms, and certain ones will be. And that's just because the way the setting is set up. So there are such things as benign necromancy in the setting as well. There's also the setting has its own version of the Inquisition called the Order of Illumination, who go after witches and necromancers. So that's something else you can play as an adventuring company. I think that's it. Have I got anything else I can say? We've got the fatigue rules for spellcasting. That's something we can look at when we get more into magic at some point. Yeah. There's also a table of severe injuries. If you've listened to Darker Days Radio, you know we like Warhammer Fantasy. That means we love severe injury tables. Also, warlocks in the Iron Kingdoms, that term means something different. So there's the warlocks control war beasts. You can play a warlock, a D&D warlock, but that means you have obviously pledged your soul to someone. I would say if you're going to play that type of warlock, that mostly means you're an infernalist, because it makes most sense with that. Tieflings, you may as well not bother with, because there's an equivalent in the setting called the Satixis, and we'll get into that another day. uh, that's basically an overview of the Iron Kingdom's Requiem from the outset. So we have an idea of what you want to explore then, Crystal.
Yeah.
And I think next episode we're going to talk about a particular place in the Iron Kingdoms to kind of again have a bit more of a, I guess, to condense a few things and get a feel for what a location feels like, of where you could basically play an entire campaign in one city
Yeah.
and have loads of detail and just stay with that.
That'd be awesome.
So we'll do that, and then after that we'll pick another topic which might be looking at one of the kingdoms in more detail, or look at some of the stuff from the wilderness the wilderness peoples. That might be good. But
Okay.
yeah, that's Iron Kingdoms. Any other last thoughts?
Um, no, I don't think so. Like, there is a lot here, and it can seem very, very overwhelming. Um, Continue to listen to the series if you're interested, but feel like it's overwhelming because we're planning on breaking down stuff, so it's a lot easier to digest.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get into. I think we'll mostly at some point we'll do. Everyone builds a character, like what they, not in detail, but like we'll do like what we plug together to make our favorite kind of like exciting build.
Yeah.
Like I can tell you already, I I'll try and not pick Gun Mage. I really love Gun Mage though. Um, I love it so much. Yeah, there's loads. I mean, it's gonna get crazy when we start talking about Nightmare Empire, because we're gonna start making undead characters.
Nice.
And ghosts, playable ghosts, playable
I'm.
ghosts.
I mean, who doesn't want to play Ghost at one point?
Yeah. Right. Well, I think that's it for now. We will be back soon with another episode of this. We'll be back soon with another episode of Dark Hammer, because we've got one more Chaos God to talk about in that. If you're listening to this, the most recent episode of Crystal's RPG writing mentorship series is out, where we talk about imposter syndrome. And then the next episode is coming up, will be coming up soon, which will be on the topic of.
I haven't
Haven't
reached out
decided
to the
yet.
people. I haven't reached out to the people yet. Hold on a second. Where did I put it?
And then
Yeah,
while Crystal looks for
sorry.
that, we'll. I can't remember. I think there's mostly some books we need to review at some point for.
Oh, there's a bunch of books that are coming out.
For
It's gonna be on social media and websites.
classic. Yeah. Okay, that's good. And then yeah, we'll have an episode, the main show, when we find a topic or releases that we need to review or someone to interview at some point. It's been a bit slow on the World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness front these days. I mean, we've got stuff to talk about from the Player's Guide, of course. So I haven't even read that yet, so I need to have a look at that.
I'm excited to be able to finally start talking about it.
Also, we need to talk about Imperium Maledictum, which is the new Warhammer 40,000 RPG that's out, which is percentile based. So that's going to be fun. Let's think. There was also something else that I was going to say. And also, Warhammer Fest is coming up at the end of April. I'll be going to that. So we'll be chatting about that afterwards.
Yeah.
There's loads, actually. I think we're finally back into the swing of things. It's just been a long kind of hiatus for some of us because it's just been too busy and too exhausted. But I think we're finding our momentum again.
Yeah. There was a little bit of a burnout.
There always is.
I think
which is going to be important for the mentorship thing. It's all about burnout.
Yeah.
Also, obviously, as I said at the start, Black Ballad was funded, which is a 5e setting / campaign. So again, obviously, if you listen to this, you're interested in 5e, perhaps. So that means have a look at that. There might be things you want to port over one way, in one direction or the other, to make your own homebrew settings. So have at it. That's already been through its backer kit, but of course, if you want to pre-order it, you can do so. There is there are links and so forth to do that.
Yep. Yeah, there are pre-order links in the backer kit.
Yeah. So that's it. So thank you for listening. Thank you again, Crystal, for asking questions and being excited about Iron Kingdoms, because it is kick-ass. I do love it. And we'll be back soon. But if you want to ask questions and comment, contact us at darkdaysradio@gmail.com. Go to www.dark-days.org for all the episodes. Go to @darkdaysradio on Instagram, Twitter, and anywhere else. Come over to our Discord to chat about this or any other roleplay stuff, and ask us questions, give us suggestions. Tell us if there's something you want to learn more about on the podcast. And I think that is it. So goodbye for now.